What actually happens to a modern car when you don't drive it for 30 days, 60 days, how about a year? Well, here's a spoiler. It doesn't just sit there peacefully. The fuel starts to break down, the battery drains, tires deform, fluids separate, cylinders can rust, moldy interior, and then the rodents move in. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just cover it up, it's going to be fine, you're in for a big, expensive surprise. I've seen stored cars come out of hiding in unusable condition just from the neglect. But it doesn't have to be that way. In this video, I want to show you the secrets that dealerships, collectors, and pro techs use to preserve vehicles for months, even years, without major headaches. We're talking about fuel system tricks, battery hacks, pest control methods, tire protection, and more. If you've got a car that's sitting for the winter, maybe you're going on deployment, you've got an extended vacation coming, or just because you don't drive it much, this will be the video for you. Let's dive right in. There are a couple things to consider before you prep your car for storage. I think the most important consideration is just going to be how long do you plan to store the car for. A lot of people, they want to go on vacation, they come in and they ask me, hey, I'm going to go out of town for 4 weeks and I just really want to know, what do I need to do to my car to prepare it for storage while I'm on vacation? So for me, there's usually a cutoff in there, right around somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks. It just really depends on the car and your battery status and the maintenance level of the car. But normally up to between 3 and 6 weeks, if you're not going to use your car, there's not a whole lot you really need to do. The first consideration would just be, is your car even going to crank over when you get back? If you've got a brand new battery and you have a car that is not draining the battery for any reason, there's no reason you couldn't let your car sit for a month and then come back and have that car start for you without any problems or any big deals. So anything less than a month, I would say probably not much you need to do. If you wanted to disconnect the battery, that might help extend the life of the battery. If you had a little bit of drain going on, which most cars do over time, then that's a good plan. If you're going to be letting it sit for longer than that, now we need to start talking about some of these other things we're going to get into. The second consideration, preparing for storage, is just going to be, where is the car stored? If you're putting it on the side of your house outside, that's completely different from storing it inside in the garage, especially if you got a climate-controlled garage. Two different scenarios there. It might require a little bit different preparation on it. Storing inside is obviously the best option for you. If you've got a garage, that's the safest place for it. You're less worried about weather, less worried about humidity. Those types of things are going to creep into the long-term effects of the paint condition of overall components in there. Rust starts to build up if you're outdoors. So those are definitely two different scenarios. So we can talk about those for just a moment. Outdoors is going to require you probably to cover the car up. So it doesn't take long outdoors for the sun and ultraviolet rays to really start to deteriorate the paint, especially if you don't have a good coat of paint protection on there. We've got moisture creeping in. If you cover your car, it's really important that you get a breathable car cover, something that's made for outdoors but also breathable. You've got to let some of that moisture remove itself. It can't be trapped underneath the car cover and start to degrade things, start to corrode your paint and all the metal components on there. So that's an important consideration. Even if you're inside, you may want to consider putting a car cover on it. It'll keep the dust off. It'll keep people from walking by it and scratching it accidentally. So a car cover is a good choice for either direction you go. Just what type of car cover you'll be using will be the most important factor. I think the first major consideration most people have is the battery going to be any good when you get back? So anywhere after a month or so, that month to 6 week range is really when you're going to start to notice problems with your battery. It's going to deteriorate a little bit every day over time, especially if you leave it connected. Now, keep in mind, I mentioned earlier, if you're up to 30 days or so, there's not much you really need to do. I believe you can safely just leave your battery connected and come back home. It should start fine, considering you've got a good battery and the car has been well maintained. And none of those things are really going to be an issue up to about 30 days. It's after that is when you really start to notice the problems. You're going to be gone for 2 months. I would definitely disconnect the battery. Not only would I disconnect the battery, but I would recommend that you find yourself some sort of a battery maintainer, something that will trickle charge the battery and also turn itself back off. So we don't need any kind of high current battery charging. Just want a battery maintainer, not so much what we call a charger. So those devices made by companies like Battery Tender, I believe, is one of them. I'll put a couple of links up in the description. They have a couple of eyelets that you can connect to the battery terminals with a plug-in on it. So it's easy. You can just leave the plug on it, especially if you come and go a lot and your car is constantly sitting. It's a nice little device just to be able to run it under the hood. You plug it in the wall, and then you can just kind of walk away from your car. And when you come back, the battery should be fully maintained, and you just hook your negative cable back up, and the car should crank over just fine. So this is what I would do for anything longer than, let's say, 30 days or 6 weeks or so. If you're going to be sitting for longer than that time period, a couple of months, you may just want to pull the battery out of the car and bring it into a climate-controlled area where you can leave that trickle charger on it. Batteries seem to not like the heat so much or the cold. They kind of have some adverse effects on them. So especially if your car is sitting outside, maybe you don't want to leave it out there. Maybe you want to bring it into the garage. Set it up on a pallet of wood or something where it's off the ground. And then you can just connect that trickle charger to it and let it just do its thing while you're gone. Come back and you can reinstall the battery in the car and you should be good to go. Now just keep in mind, batteries don't last forever either. They do have a little bit of a shelf life. So if you're going to be gone for years, I would just plan on putting a new battery in the car when you get back. If that's one of those things where you're going to just put this car up and you don't want to think about it for a long time, just pull the battery out and you'll be putting a new one in come time to restart that car. The second most obvious problem that most people have is the fuel. So we'll talk about some fuel and fluids here. Gasoline will start to break down over time. After 30 days, it starts to lose a little potency, and then certainly gas is, by the time 3 months has come around, it's lost some of its energy. It's starting to evaporate a little bit. Oxidation's creeping in. All those things happen. The gasoline starts to deteriorate. So what we want to do is we want to add something to the fuel tank, and these products I've got here over my shoulder are products designed for that. So Stabil has been probably one of the most consistent companies out there making fuel stabilizer, and it's just as simple as filling your gas tank up to the top and then topping it up with this product. Now this product will use about 1 ounce for every 2.5 gallons. So if we've got a full tank, maybe you got 15 or 20 gallons in there, you can do the math on it. It doesn't require a lot of product, but I would put that product in the gas tank. And especially if you're driving a carbureted vehicle, I would recommend you actually drive the car with that product in there. Make sure it circulates all through the fuel system, all the way up into the carburetor, fills the float bowl in there, fills the fuel pump, all these areas and cavities where it starts to restrict, because the smallest orifices are the ones that get attacked first. Okay, once the gas starts to separate and it leaves that jelly behind, it's impossible to get out usually without pulling it apart and cleaning out all the passages on it. And that's kind of complicated on a carbureted car. With a fuel-injected car, you don't really run into those problems quite as much. We've got a lot of pressure in the system. It can usually blow some of that stuff through. Consider it more of like self-cleaning, right, with fuel-injected components. So either way, you want to stabilize the fuel. It's going to be sitting for months. You definitely need to put some of this in there. I can tell you some cars I've seen sit for a really long time and the fuel is completely stale. It has trouble starting at all. So the longer it sits, the worse the fuel gets. So just put some stabilizer in it, tank full, run it through, and then you can go ahead and park the car. Now, we're talking about fluids on here. A lot of people ask, what should I do with all the fluids? There's not a lot you need to do other than just make sure they're clean and full. So especially with the oil has a lot of contaminants that are inside of it. So if you've driven 3,000 miles on your oil, or even 1,000 miles for that matter, and you're going to be parking this thing for 6 months, I would recommend you change the oil first. So it seems like a little added hassle, a little added expense maybe, but it's better to start with some fresh oil in there. Fresh oil can sit for a long time. It doesn't degrade really much sitting there, not like fuel does. So I would say just change your oil and then go ahead and park it. You definitely want to have something in there. As far as the rest of the fluids go, the coolant, the transmission fluid, those types of things, just make sure they're full. If they're clean, great, but definitely full and everything topped up. This way when you come back, you'll be able to identify, did anything leak out while you're gone? You might see some spots on the ground. Make sure the fluids are clean, because then you can identify what type of fluid is easily by the color of it. The next most important thing that I think we need to address is the tires. So battery first, fuel second, then tires are the next thing on my list that's really just going to start to break down over time. They'll start to develop flat spots, they lose air, all these things happen to it. And tires will actually just deteriorate from sitting, especially if you got them outdoors in the sun. You're going to start to dry rot just from sitting there. They will develop flat spots on them where they've been sitting for a long period of time, and those flat spots are not going to drive out. So once you pull that car out of storage for 2 years and you try to drive it, it's just going to thump itself down the road. You're looking at a full new set of tires on there. There's a couple of ways you can minimize that impact, and the most obvious way is to get them off the ground. So if you have the ability to put your car up on wood blocks or jack stands, something where the tires aren't touching anything and there's no weight on the tires themselves, this is the ideal situation to store your car. Now keep in mind, I'm not talking about for 3 months. If you're sitting for 3 months, you shouldn't have to develop flat spots or anything. But after 6 months to a year, I think is really kind of the point where you start thinking about those things and saying, well, we know we're going to lose some tire pressure, which means that the flat spots are going to get even bigger. The tires are really starting to get hard. They haven't had any motion, and you're really going to start to see some problems from that. So even if you've got brand new tires on your car, you might be looking at putting a new set of tires on a year or two from now. So keep that in mind. But up off the ground is going to be ideal. 4 jack stands, 4 crates of wood, however you think you need to do it. Get that thing off the ground and your tires will thank you for it. Now, the second thing that I would do, especially if you can't put it on jack stands, is I would overinflate those tires. So I'm not talking about putting 80 pounds in there, but maybe run it up to the maximum available tire pressure that's rated for on the side of the tire versus what the door decal tells you. So if you can get those tire pressures up another 5 or 8 pounds or whatever it is, certainly helps the tire stop deforming as much as it would. And it could be the difference between you being able to use those tires when you pull it out of storage versus needing new tires when you come out of storage. Another consideration for you after tires might be the brakes. So I know you're not using the brakes so much, and that's probably the best plan for you, but you need to be aware that if you set the parking brake for an extended period of time, it's possible that the brake cables can lock up on you or seize. If your brake cables are operated through the brake calipers, those calipers can get seized. So my recommendation to you would be to chock the wheels if you're going to store it for a long period of time and release the parking brake. I wouldn't put that on. I've seen cars come out of storage. We had somebody in here not long ago with a Corvette, and their rear calipers were just destroyed from sitting for years. So it's a good idea just to leave the parking brake loose. Don't apply it, and chock your wheels with something. Make sure your vehicle's in a spot where it's hopefully not on a hill or anything. Make sure it's in park if you have that ability. And if it's a manual gearbox, then you'll definitely have to chock the wheels with some good solid wheel chocks to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. I wouldn't leave the parking brake on for years. I don't think that's a great idea. Now here's the next problem that I see, depending on where you live and depending on where the car is stored, is the unexpected arrival of new tenants in your vehicle. Yeah, we're talking about rodents. These guys will find their way into just about anything. They're seeking shelter like the rest of us. And they also really like the comfort of under your hood, in your car somewhere. Now, over my career, I've seen pests and rodents come in all various sizes, shapes, forms. You know, we're talking about cats, squirrels, possums, you name it. They're all end up their way in there, snakes, you know, whatever it is. So you can't do a lot about all of them, but you can certainly put some mitigation process in place. So I would recommend that if you're going to store your car, you need to understand they like the warmth and shelter of it, but they also like to eat your wiring. They love insulation. So they're going to find those things and they're going to attack, you know. So if you can put out some deterrents, whether you put out some rodent traps, maybe put some pellets out. They've got those peppermint sprays and all kinds of stuff that you can find online to help keep them away from your vehicle. That's the best process that you can go through to make sure that these guys don't move in and occupy your vehicle. Just as these rodents love the shelter of the engine bay and all these parts, they also find their way into the interior somehow, especially mice. I've seen them in blower motors, squirrel cages. They just end up everywhere. They can get in all kinds of crevices. So another important part of storing your car, I'm just going to be 2 parts to this really. One, you need to make sure the interior is clean and free of any food. So get in there with your vacuum. Make sure your car is clean on the interior. I would go so far as probably to detail it. Make sure it's nice and clean, smells fresh for you when you get out. Use any kind of air freshener you want to put in there. Maybe you want to leave some baking soda in there to help remove some moisture while your vehicle sits. It'll keep the odors away and make it pleasant for you when you come back. It'll also help keep some of these rodents out of your car. And if there's no food source in there, they probably won't work their way in too far. So those are a couple things I would do, and that leads me more into the rest of it. Obviously, the exterior of the car should be prepared properly as well. We want to make sure the paint's protected, it's clean, you don't have any tree sap on it, bird poop, any of those things that are acetic and will start to deteriorate your paint. So it doesn't take long. I can tell you bird poop, you know, within a day or so, it's already starting to etch your clear coat, and that stuff is hard to correct down the road. It really just eats all the way through the paint into the base coat, and it'll just keep on going. So I think a clean car on the exterior is important before you cover it with anything or before you store it. So clean it up, make sure everything's polished, looking good, and then I would put a fresh coat of wax on it, and then go ahead and cover it, and that's the best protection you're going to be able to provide to the exterior. It's not a bad idea if you're trying to protect your car from rodents is to seal off the intake ductwork and the tailpipes of the car. So we don't want the rodents to be able to get in your exhaust. You don't want them making a home in your muffler. If you could put some steel wool in there, that's a great idea. It's usually a good repellent. You can put some duct tape over the tailpipe pieces. Just keep in mind that adhesive will probably going to take a little cleaner to get them off your tailpipes later. And then the same thing for the intake. You want to go ahead and make sure that's blocked off, taped off, covered up so that the rodents can't easily get inside your air filter box. I see cars all the time, they come in, they've got a big nest of something in there, bird's nest, rat's nest, something going on in the air box or in the air intake duct. So it's really important you find the main entry point for that and you cover it up, block it off. If you have to take a piece off and then cover it up, that's fine. Store that piece off to the side. Just remember you did that when you're ready to awaken the car from its long slumber. So far, I've talked about all these tips that I think you should perform if you're going to be going anything from short to medium term storage. So anything from that 6 weeks to 2 months up to a year or two. So that's about as far as I would go on those. Now, if you're going to be storing a car longer than that, I'm talking about multiple years, I would recommend you take one extra step, and that's applying an engine fog to the internal part of the engine. So they make a can of these things called fog. You can actually spray them into the intake manifold, usually through the air cleaner intake duct somewhere, and allow that to circulate through the engine. And what that does is it just coats the internal parts with a film, a layer that's going to help prevent rust and corrosion inside the cylinders. So these things are made for that. They make them for marine applications, they make them for diesel applications, they make them for gasoline applications. Make sure you get the correct one. Read the instructions, make sure you follow it properly. And then you're safe to let your car sit. And that interior metal components, piston rings, pistons, cylinder walls, all those things, it'll stop any rust or corrosion on the interior. I can tell you there's times I've seen cars sit for a really long period of time and they just eat themselves away. They're right around the seal of the piston ring. So we don't want any damage to the internal parts. That takes a long time and it takes a lot of moisture for that to happen. If you're in a really dry climate, it's probably not even necessary. If you're somewhere where it's really humid, maybe you're up in northwest United States, I would definitely recommend you do that. It's worth the extra step. I know it's a little time consuming, but if you're going to be letting it sit for years anyway, and you want to protect your investment, definitely an extra step that I would take. I know a lot of you older school guys like me, you've got some other methods to protect the internal components of the engine. You might be using a little bit of transmission fluid. That's an old school trick. Some guys like to use some WD-40 in the cylinders. Whatever you need to do is fine, but I think the safest and most effective way for the average person is just go ahead and get yourself a can of fogging spray. It's really easy to apply. You don't take any spark plugs out. You don't have to worry about hydrolocking a cylinder. Hydrolock is when we have too much liquid in a cylinder and we can't compress it with the valves closed and we end up bending a rod or something. So I want you guys to be able to store this car safely and then return it to service when you're done. That's the whole goal of this. So I would just say get the fogging spray. It's the safest and best way to do that. Assuming that you've prepped your car properly, at some point you're going to want to bring that car back into service. You're going to want to resurrect it from the dead, and hopefully you've performed all these steps to reduce and mitigate as much of these problems as you can. Either way, sometimes bringing your car back out of storage can present some challenges. So everything that we've done to this point is to try to limit the amount of damage, amount of problems. That doesn't mean that there won't be any. It's possible. It just really depends on your situation. A lot of cars, after you do this, you can bring them right out of service and they're ready to go. And that's the hope for this. But as with anything, a good maintenance program, when you bring it back into service, and a good inspection is really the first step on here. So you want to make sure that once you pull that car out of service, you've got your covers backed off. Maybe you're restoring it to the ground because you had it on jack stands or blocks of some sort. You really just want to go through everything and check it all. You want to check all the fluid levels on it. You want to make sure you didn't leak anything and none of your fluids ran low while you were away, while you haven't used the vehicle. We want to make sure we set all the tire pressures. Maybe you want to work through that parking brake, make sure it functions before you start driving away. You want to pump your brake pedal up, make sure it didn't get any air in the system for some reason. Maybe the fluid leaked out. Don't try to drive away on a car and you haven't even touched the brake pedal yet, so that's important that you've got some solid brakes on it. Inspecting for any rodent damage. We talked about the insulation, the wiring, and those types of things. You want to take a close look around all the components you can see, especially under the hood, and make sure you don't see any of that stuff going on in there. Let's give it a good, thorough inspection. Check your air filter, pull it out. Do an inspection on it. Remove your covers from the intake and the exhaust. Remove the steel wool if we put it in there. Remove your rodent pellets. All those things that you installed before you left, let's go ahead and take all that back out again. and see if we can restore this thing to the exact function it was when you parked it. In addition to that, make sure you give a good inspection to those tires. Like I said, if the car's been sitting for many years, you might just see some of those fine lines that we call dry rot starting to develop on the sidewalls, in between the treads. If your tires are dry rotted just because of age and just sitting out there and the rubber is starting to deteriorate, just put some new tires on it. It's just not worth the safety risk of trying to drive on tires that are already 4 years old because your car has been sitting, or maybe it's 6 years old because you had 2 years on it before you parked it. So just plan on investing on some new tires, okay? So all this inspecting stuff, all the things that we prepped ahead of time, you want to go through those again. And of course, you got to get your battery connected again. So you want to go ahead and test that battery if you have an ability to do it. Hopefully it's been maintained properly. If it hasn't, you'll be looking at a new battery. Of course, when you connect your battery, you want to make sure you check the connections on there, make sure they haven't got any corrosion on them, make sure they're clean and tight. And then the last thing I would recommend you do, it really just depends how long it's been sitting. If your car hasn't been sitting for 6 months or something, I wouldn't be too worried about it. If you're one of these cars that's been sitting for years, I would recommend you disable the ignition and or the fuel system, and crank that engine over a bit before you start it. Okay, so it doesn't hurt to try to make sure everything's loose and free. Circulate that oil pump and try to get a little bit of oil pressure going before you actually start the car. It's just not a bad idea to do that. Is it 100% necessary? No. You could easily just go ahead and fire it up, and it might just light right up on you. But I like to do that if I'm going to have a car sitting for years. I want to go ahead and at least crank it over without the ability of starting. Give it a good 60 seconds or so to do that. Hopefully you've disabled the fuel system so you don't flood it. Now, a couple easy ways to do that. You can just usually pull the fuel injection fuse on it. There's lots of ways in there. You want to just make sure that you've got it disabled so it's not going to run, and ideally no fuel coming into the cylinders. There is one more challenge that I wanted to mention. When you pull this car back out of storage after you reconnect the battery, the car might have to learn some things over again. It's lost its long-term memory on it. And what that means to you is that maybe your radio won't function. Maybe you've got windows that don't roll up all the way, a sunroof that doesn't function properly. All kinds of things can be affected. Climate control. There's a lot of stuff that can be affected by losing the memory to the battery for a long period of time, especially that long-term memory. If you guys haven't watched my video on replacing a battery, I mentioned all that stuff in there. You can go ahead and check it out. But a lot of initializations of certain components are required on certain cars. So just keep that in mind. Once you get everything connected, you might have a problem with some of those features. They need to be reinitialized or reset, basically, in order to make them function properly. Thanks for watching this content. Make sure you check out some more. We've got lots of great videos for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that bell so you get notifications when we create new content every Thursday. We'll see you in the next one.